Hey pole dancer, welcome to the evidence-based pole podcast. My name is Rosy Boa. I'm a pole dancer, pole teacher, and personal trainer. And I've started this podcast so that we can learn together, talk with the experts, read the research, and feel better on and off the pole. So if that sounds like something you're interested in doing, let's go. All right, welcome to an episode that is super near and dear to my heart, very important for pole dancers. I think everyone should listen to it. It is on shoulders. So the theme for the studio in March is stronger shoulders. It's something that I think is really, really important for everyone, students and instructors alike, to be very knowledgeable about and to pay a lot of attention to, because pole dance puts a lot of demands on our shoulders. Even just reaching up and grabbing the pole may not seem like it's that big a deal, but requires a range of motion. And once we start putting weight into it, a range of strength that is just well outside the envelope of the demands that we tend to make on our shoulders day to day as, people living in the industrialized West. And pretty much every study that's looked at the incidence of injuries in pole dancers, shoulders have been absolutely number one. So Joanna Nicholas' study et al. From 2022 found that shoulders were the most commonly injured body parts. And then a couple of more specialized studies. I believe that research team mainly worked with Australians. There was a research study by Malepszy. I'm not saying that correctly. It's M-A-L with a line through it, O-L-E-P-S-Z-Y. I believe that's Polish. Looking at Polish pole dancers in 2022, they also found that the shoulder was the most commonly injured body part. And then Lee et al. In 2019, they did a global online survey and they found, hey, look at that. Shoulders are the most commonly injured body part for pole dancers. So we're getting a lot of pole injuries. We're putting a lot of demands on our shoulders. We should know what we need to do to prepare ourselves for that movement, and also what that movement should look like. And unfortunately, I think a lot of folks, based on their background, have gotten into teaching and just haven't really gotten a lot of training around what to do with your shoulders and pole and how to condition them and how to help avoid some of these more common injuries. So we're going to talk a little bit here. And I would just say I'm going to be referencing a couple of times here Applied Anatomy of Aerial Arts by Emily Sherb, who's a doctor of physical therapist and a researcher, actually been on the podcast. It's the Circus Doc episode if you want to go back and listen to that. Very, very helpful reference. So why do shoulders get injured so much? There's sort of a general pathway that is associated with a lot of these injuries, but there's also some things that are special about shoulders that make them, an area where we should focus a little bit more. And partially that is due to the fact that they aren't super connected to our skeletons. This is going to sound a little bit weird, but all the sort of shouldery stuff, the scapula, the humerus, all that business, is really only connected to the rest of our skeleton through the clavicle. So that's the bone sort of underneath the throat. If you're familiar with a heart spoon, that's the ones on the side of the heart spoon, if you use that term. And it's really not a very big connection at all. So if you put your hand sort of on the front of your throat and you push in a little bit and you move your shoulder up and down, you can actually feel the connection a little bit. That's pretty much it. So if it's not really lots of thick bones connecting to each other that are connecting our shoulders to our trunks, what is it? Well, it's mostly muscle, right? Ligaments, tendons, all that good stuff. And that means that the benefit of that is that our shoulders can move a lot. We have a big range of motion in our shoulders, far more than, think about, quadrupeds, right? Cows cannot really lift their hooves above their heads going forward, right? That's just not a thing they can do, right? Or even if you've seen a dog try to reach the middle of the top of its head with its legs, right? It's very challenging for them. They just don't have that range of motion. Whereas humans, we do. We can move our shoulders in a lot of different ways. We can throw things. There's some anthropological argumentation that the structure of our shoulder actually comes from the need of early humans to throw things, which maybe I think that the jury's still out on that, but it is a theory. So we have a lot of mobility in our shoulder joint, and that means that what is actually creating stability is our muscles, right? So we sort of have to take responsibility as movers for supporting the shoulder joint in our movement using our muscles, because it's not like the hips, right? It's not like we have this super, deep joint that's super supported. There's lots of, ligaments just like holding it in there, and you can really count on it. Well, for those of us who have no collagen, abnormalities, if you're hypermobile, maybe less of a thing that you can count on, but nobody has that with the shoulder, right? But that also means that because the shoulder can move in a lot of different ways, we have to use muscles to do it. We have to be really intentional to find the pathway that's going to strongest, and in particular to make sure that we're keeping space in the shoulder joints. One of the really common injuries we see with pole dancers is shoulder impingement. So if you've ever gotten sort of a kind of a zingy, nervy, irritated, inflamed pain right at sort of the knob of your shoulder, usually that's because there is the patterns of movement that you are doing with your shoulders are causing the nerves in there to get pinched, to rub on bone. And we can avoid that really only by moving our muscles in a different way and finding different movement patterns. So shoulders, they're really mobile. We have to choose how we move them. That's great because we can move them in a lot of different ways, right? We can do back bends. Imagine like a camel doing a back bend. They can't really do it. Their bodies don't do that, but ours can. But it does mean that we have to like be responsible for the ways that we move our body. So pros and cons. And the thing that I think is most helpful to think about, and where I see that students, progress the most quickly and see the most benefit the most quickly, is really in working on that pathway of our arms coming up overhead. So this can be forward up overhead. Usually I teach it and talk about it coming sideways and up overhead, because generally there's fewer, limitations there with overhead movement. And it's a delicate ballet. There's a lot of choreography involved, right? So if you start with your arms down at your side and then you reach them out, for the first little bit, you are just moving the head of the shoulder joint, the head of the humerus, right, in the shoulder joint itself. That's all that's happening there for about the first 30 degrees. And then for the next little bit, the scapula, so the shoulder blade, that sort of triangle shaped bone that sits on your back, you might, depending on your mobility level, you may or may not be able to feel your own scapula. I have trouble with it because I got short little arms. But you can have someone standing in front of you and you can sort of feel around and feel that it's very big. Also shares a root with the word spatula, by the way, because they were originally made from scapulas. Anyway, not human ones. And then for the next little bit, you need your scapula to move. And depending on your pole training, you might be like, oh, right, of course. I have been told I need to have my shoulders down and back, so I need to move my scapula down my back and towards my spine. You do not. What actually needs to happen to make that motion happen is that, so it's like an upside down triangle, right? The bottom edge of the triangle needs to move out towards the side of your body, and the whole triangle needs to move upwards. So as your arm comes out to the side, you want a little bit of shrug. You want to bring your shoulders up towards your ears a little bit. And if that is something that you are actively trying not to do, you're trying to keep your shoulders depressed, that is one of the most common movement patterns that I have noticed in students that have then gone on to develop impingement. Not usually my students. I will say, because I talk about this a lot, I'm that kind of nerd. Right, so you want that little bit of shrug, and then you are sort of into the upper range of your reach at that point. And then the other thing that needs to happen as your arm is coming up, right? So you need to have a little bit of shrug. You need to have the bottom triangle point of the scapula moving out a little bit. You also want to externally rotate. So and what I'm talking about there is specifically that upper arm bone, the humerus. If you had your arms down at your side, external rotation would look like your bicep muscle, right? The big one that pops up when you flex your arm. instead of being pointed forward, it would rotate away from your body to be pointed to the side. And as you lift your arm up, your bicep will begin to rotate even further back to point behind you. So in your right arm, the direction of rotation would be clockwise. In your left arm, the direction of rotation would be counterclockwise. I had to think about that really hard to make sure I said that the right direction, because I am dyslexic. So as we lift our arm up to the side, we want to find a little bit of shrug. We want to find the shoulder blade moving. And we also want to externally rotate the arm the whole time. So this is a lot of work from the rotator cuff. Students who've taken classes with me a lot will be familiar with the sort of like arm raising drills that we do. And it looks so simple, right? We're just raising our arms out to the side very slowly and then bringing them back down. But we're really focusing on building that strong supported movement pathway. And if I have us do 3, by the end of it, we're all like sweating and shaking because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of mind-body connection. It's a lot of muscular work. And it's also something where you can resist against yourself a little bit to even further increase the strength building. And just to let you know that I'm not like making things up about this. So this is actually a direct quote from Emily Sherb from her book. The 2 most common errors in hanging are over-recruitment of the latissimus dorsi, aka the lats, and the aerialist not being able to maintain humeral external rotation. These 2 compensations can occur together or separately, depending on the individual area. So a couple of ways to know whether or not you are doing these things. I will say, in my experience, pole dancers tend to have more trouble with external rotation than lat over recruitment, but I definitely do see both. For the lat over recruitment, a good way to see if that's happening is to take a video of yourself or take a photograph of yourself, have someone do that, and look to see if the sides of your body are really sort of moving outwards and bulging. It's a little bit hard to see, but the other thing that can be really helpful is look and see if at the top of your shoulders there's a really deep crease when your arms are overhead, and one that really comes in towards your neck quite a bit. So you can see if you can make that go away, if that's something that you are noticing, by having a little bit of that shrug that I mentioned, just a little bit of your shoulders up towards your ears a tiny bit. And the other thing is not having external rotation, right? So that's that pattern I mentioned. If your arm is extended above your head, ideally your bicep is pointed slightly behind you. How much you can do it is really going to depend on your range of motion and strength, but you're finding quite a bit of that external rotation when your arm is up overhead. You do not always want to externally rotate in every single position. This is specifically for overhead movement. So, lots to think about there. And this is particularly with this pattern of reaching up overhead, doing things overhead. The other thing that I see shoulders generally is more connected to the wrist. And this is with shapes like apprentice, shapes like possibly genie, possibly jasmine, possibly Marley, things when you have a hand on the pole, right? And down the pole, your arm is straight, or you're attempting to keep your arm straight. And the problem that I see is if your arm is too high, shoulder really comes up towards the ear, so you have a hard time finding strength pushing down into that arm. Your elbow might bend, and your wrist might come into a very tight angle. So if you're somebody who tends to notice that you have wrist grumpiness, elbow grumpiness, headaches, neck tension, shoulder tension after working on moves like apprentice, probably the issue is your arm placement, and that is affecting everything up that chain. It'll probably also feel very hard to hold the position. You'll feel like you're really fighting to stay where you are, and you can't just kind of relax into it and find a position where your weight is balanced. So for that, the fix is pretty simple. You move your hand further down the pole, right? And you ideally want it to be far enough down the pole that based on your arm length and your wrist angle and your hand length and everything, you more or less can make a straight line between the back of your hand and the top of your wrist. It may feel like you can't find as much push down in that arm. And if that is the case for you, then I would actually say that your limiting factor might be grip strength. It could be that you are trying to move your hand up and, create that not great biomechanical position for yourself because you're having a hard time gripping the pole hard enough in that more extended position. So if that's you and that's where you're at with things like Apprentice and you're finding you're getting all those sort of cluster of symptoms together, I would definitely highly recommend working on your grip strength, applying grip aid if you're not using it. If you're in a place where you have an option for different pole coatings, maybe trying a different pole coating. A lot of people feel stickier on brass. Maybe wearing gloves if that's something that works for you. I don't like the feeling of, sorry. It's a sensory thing for me. I don't like sticky stuff on the pole. I've given it a good couple tries in the past and it's not for me. Not a good sensory for me. But if it works for you, try it out, see if it helps. So, those are the big things that I see with shoulders most often. Setting aside things like, back bending or, working towards movements like Dove or Superman or, what's it? There's a movement that I'm forgetting the name of. It's like Dove, but flipped the other way. What's it called? Anyway, Dove but flips the other way. Y'all know what I mean. Where you're holding the pole with both hands above your head. Or even things like Titanic, right? Or shoulder mount. Setting aside general things like that, those are the two problems that I see most often. And working on external rotation and not over engaging your lats and finding that scapular movement will actually make things like Superman, ballerina is another one, much easier because you'll be able to make more space in your body more easily. So some things to think about with shoulders. We're talking about it all this month in the studio. We're going to be doing so much shoulder conditioning. And the reason that I brought this up is I've recently had a couple of new students come to me who came in having the shoulder impingement problems. And we talked about this and I was like, well, you're doing all these things. And they were like, no, I didn't know I was supposed to. And I was like, very, very fixable, right? You just gotta, know better, do better. And if no one's ever told you, how could you possibly know, right? It's not like everybody walks into pole the first day and gets like the anatomy breakdown of what all is going down. And probably we shouldn't. Probably that would be too much information for you when you first get started. And this is way more and more detail than I would go into in class, right? In class, I would give you a couple exercises. I would mention it briefly, but then we would focus more on the specific mechanics of the movement that we were working on. So if you're interested in working in shoulder stuff, come join us. It's fun. It's delightful. We'll be doing a bunch of drills together. And also working on different movements that, are asking a lot of our shoulders and thinking about how we can do them more efficiently, beginning to really build our understanding of them. One of my big goals for my students that I'm focusing on more this year is developing their skill to be able to break down movements and understand what's really going in on them so that they can, create variations more easily, understand what's important and what's not important, understand, what are options that they can have so they can play with stuff. Because that's what really appeals to me about pole on an intellectual level. And I think it's just fun. I think it's a fun way to learn. So love to have you come join us if you're interested in playing with some of these things. Regardless, do your external rotation drills, right? Really focus on that movement pathway of being able to reach overhead, that sort of glenohumeral rhythm. I know that it may feel silly to work on reaching overhead, but it is important and will help you build the patterns off the pole that will make you feel better and stronger on the pole. So that's all I've got for you for this episode. I hope you found it enlightening. I hope you enjoyed it. I got citations in the down there as always, and I will see you next time. Bye! Thanks so much for joining me today, pole dancer. This podcast is a production of Slink Through Strength, the inclusive, evidence-based online pole studio. So if you're looking for a place to train, either off-pole conditioning and flexibility, or learning pole tricks and refining your pole movement, you can find us online at slinkthroughstrength.com.